Hello and welcome along to the latest Liverpool.com podcast. I'm your host, Matt Addison. Michael Plant and Richard Garnett are both with me this week. Before we get into today's episode, a word for our sponsors, NordVPN, who have a new app available for download, which will allow you to get reliable and affordable internet access on your trips abroad. Saily is a new eSIM service app, which is brought to you by the creators of NordVPN. Here you can choose from several affordable eSIM data plans and over 200 destinations with Saily's eSIM. You'll always have a connection when you need one. You can download Saily in your app store and use our code BLOODRED at checkout to get an exclusive 15% off your first purchase. For more information on that, please do go to the episode description box below for further details. And you can also go to saily.com/bloodred. The topic for today's podcast is keep or sell. We're going to go through a long list, actually, of Liverpool players ahead of what should be an interesting summer for the Reds. We'll go defence, midfield, and then attack, where it seems to be quite top-heavy in terms of the decisions that Arne Slot has to make. But we'll dive straight in. I'll come to you first, Michael. I'm going to group Joe Gomez and Jarell Quansah together. It looks like possibly a decision on at least one of those two players, though I'd be surprised if both of them were to leave in one summer. Obviously, Ibrahima Konaté's contract situation comes into it as well. But in terms of Gomez and Quansah, firstly, do you think it's fair to put them into the category of there being a conversation? And if so, which way would you lean on both of those players?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we'll say at the outset, and it's going to be applicable throughout, that it's obviously depending on who comes in. You know, if Liverpool were to sign another centre-back, you know, which changed the conversation. If another player was to leave, perhaps, I don't know, someone breaks a leg next week in one of these international games. So all these things are fluid. So, yeah, I think it's totally fair to throw those two players in for the simple reason that they didn't play a huge amount last year. I think it's pretty obvious to me that Slot is at best unsure about Quansah, given the fact that he obviously started him in the season. And I think that was the one and only game he started as centre-back this season in the Premier League under Slot, which is remarkable that it was the first game of the season. He clearly isn't sure on him. And then Gomez is another one who I think he does like. Obviously, he played, didn't he, about, I think it was six or seven consecutive games in around November, December time. Did really well, I thought, as well in those games and those performances. But the big problem, as we all know, with Gomez is his injury record. And yeah, look, I think if they can, you know, they receive a good offer from him, you can certainly understand the temptation to sell. And, you know, if you were to put me on the spot, I would say Gomez would be the one I would probably sell first, just given his age, his injury record, and the fact that Quansah has got plenty of years ahead of him to keep progressing and developing. But yeah, I think two really good players still, that if they were to stay at Liverpool next season, that wouldn't be a problem because they've got a lot to offer to the team in my eyes.
Yeah, Arne Slot was very clear at the end of the season how much impact Joe Gomez has had. Even when he's been injured, he said he was, you know, a big leader, a big part of this Liverpool team. And I think that is definitely something to consider when, you know, they have lost quite a few leaders and a few different players in the last couple of years. It does, you know, even Trent Alexander-Arnold will leave, obviously has left now at this point, and he was the vice captain. So things like that do come into these discussions as well. Rich, in terms of the centre-back situation, what's your take on it? How impressed have you been with Quansah so far in his Liverpool career? And do you think even for Joe Gomez, it might be a decision almost for him more than for Liverpool at the stage of the career that he is?
Well, 2 points to that, isn't there? How impressive I've been with Quansah. Not blown away is the answer. I think he's all right. I think you can get away with sort of developing yourself as a centre-back in a club where you're under less of a microscope than Liverpool. And I think it's very difficult for a young player like that who, you know, is been at fault for a few goals, has been criticised slightly by his manager, taken out of the firing line at one point early in the season. There's a lot of things that point to a negative outlook for him, but I do still think he's a decent centre back. I just don't know whether is he one who's actually going to put pressure on the two centre backs who start today, or even replace one of them, or either of them for that matter. I feel like the answer to that is no, and I feel like if there's a deal to be done with someone where they can bring in decent money for him to go and establish himself elsewhere, I think that wouldn't be a bad idea. That said, if they did keep him, that'd also be fine, I think. But I think the way I see it, he's always going to be a backup. In terms of Gomez, team's longest standing player, bags of experience, really versatile. And that's what I like about Gomez. You could literally play him anywhere across the back four. You could probably even play him in defensive midfield in an emergency. So I think we have to, when a team's been sort of changed around, as it appears things are going to happen this year, looks like it's going to be very different to 12 months ago, where it was just the management that was really changing, not the actual playing personnel. A bit of continuity doesn't go amiss, and I just feel like his vast experience at the club, but in the same way as you kind of got with James Milner, could be really invaluable. So I would keep Gomez, but as you say, I think it's a decision for him whether he's happy to sort of continue in the way that he has, and obviously I think with one fullback already through the door and another one possibly on its way, it's going to be difficult for him to establish himself in a fullback position. So he's looking at a centre-back role, isn't he? And he's got a decision to make there. But I hope he stays.
Yeah, I think we're going to sort of say the line of it. It doesn't matter almost either way for a lot of these players. I don't think there's any of them that we'd push towards the exit door necessarily, maybe one or two of them, but the majority, I think, fall into the category of it's all right either way. If they decide that they want to get more minutes elsewhere, then that will be up to them. If Liverpool can keep them and have a bigger squad depth next season, I think that's absolutely fine as well. Rich, I'll come back to you for Kostas Tsimikas as well, because I want to put him into this conversation for the defence. It feels to me more likely that he might move on than Andy Robertson this summer. You mentioned there the possibility of another fullback coming in after Jeremy Frimpong. Obviously, Milos Kerkez, the one who looks to be on Liverpool's radar in terms of left-back. If they were to sign a left-back, you'd imagine that they're not going to have three, so somebody would have to leave. And that kind of makes Kostas Tsimikas the obvious fall guy in that sort of area. But is he the one that you'd look to move on? Can you see that being something that happens this summer?
I can see that being something that happens, but I wouldn't necessarily say it was a surefire thing. I mean, Slaughter's played Tsimikas quite a lot this season, and there's got to be a reason for that. If he was entirely satisfied with Andy Robertson, then I'm sure Tsimikas wouldn't have played quite as much as he did. Don't forget, Slot sort of won the league with a pretty small squad in terms of the players that he was actually using. He didn't rotate too much, but one of the areas where he did was at fullback. So whereas we might have a slightly different sentiment in terms of Andy Robertson, a club legend, double league winner, a player who kind of epitomises everything that a Liverpool supporter expects from a long-standing player. We've probably got a bit of unconscious bias there. I think I certainly have. But of course, at the same time, an experienced footballer, an international captain, and one who's probably not going to stay beyond his current contract, I wouldn't think. So if you look to sell him on, how much would you get for Andy Robertson? No, not quite sure. Is moving Tsimikas on the better deal? It might be. So it all comes down to Slot, I think, on this one. Whereas we said with Gomez, it was down to him. I don't think that's the case here. I've no doubt that Andy Robertson has got no intention of leaving and will fight Kerkez for his place, and I'm sure we'll should be signed Kerkez, of course, and we'll try and put him under as much pressure as possible to try and win his place back. But that decision could be taken out of his hands if Slot sees it differently. However, if I was the manager, I do love Andy Robertson, so it would be pretty difficult to move him on. And I just think in terms of resale value, probably the better to move Tsimikas.
Yeah, Robertson, very much a leader in the dressing room as well. I'm sure Costa Tsimikas is to a certain extent, but Andy Robertson very much part of the leadership group and all of that kind of thing. Has been there and done it with Liverpool. I think that is definitely valuable to keep around as well. Let's move into midfield then. There's only a couple of players really to discuss here. I think most of them are reasonably established, but Harvey Elliott seems to be the one that is most likely to bring in a decent fee for Liverpool, most likely to move on, I would suspect, as well of all of those midfield options, Michael. His stance softened as the season went on, didn't it? He didn't really seem to want to leave Liverpool in January, but by the end of the season, it looked like he was in tears at Anfield on the final day. That probably suggests that there's going to be interest in him. I'm sure there will be lots of clubs that do go for him, and to me, at least, it feels like the right time for him to move on, because it's hard, I think, even before Florian Wirtz comes in, it's hard to see where he gets more minutes next season compared to last.
Yeah, I agree. And when you consider that he was essentially back up to Dominic Szoboszlai in his preferred position last season, and you're bringing in Wirtz on top of that just increases the competition, I suppose, for places, and he's just going to drop further down the pecking order. And I think you and I discussed him a few weeks ago on the podcast. I really like Harvey Elliott. I think he's a very good player, but I think that he does lack end product in terms of goals and assists. I think he takes a lot of nice touches, does a lot of nice actions, but can drift in and out of games. I'm still not totally sure where he plays. Is he a winger? Is he an attacking midfielder, a number 10? I think it probably is more playing inside, really, than out wide. And I think it just seems an obvious one, in truth, that like a handful of players in this squad, Slot clearly isn't that keen on him, isn't that convinced on him. I think he likes him, but I don't think he really trusts him. So if you can get a good price for him, considering his age as well, I think he has a decent bit to run on his contract. You could get, you're talking kind of 40, 50 million for Harvey Elliott. I think if an offer like that comes in, Liverpool should certainly bite any team's hand off, really. And obviously being linked with Newcastle, that's the kind of quality of player we're talking about here, someone to go and sign for a Champions League club. So yeah, it seems like an obvious one to me that actually probably would suit all parties, really, if he was to move on this summer.
Yeah, I feel like you can get a good fee for him as well, Rich. The question, really, I think we mentioned on the podcast last week was, if Liverpool demanded, a substantial fee, would the likes of, say, Leverkusen or Dortmund or whoever it might be that comes in for him be able to pay that? But it definitely feels like a possibility that Harvey Elliott could move on this summer, and probably even more than a possibility, a probability, I would say, at this point.
Well, at the end of the day, they only need one team to meet the valuation, and then they're going to get a deal for him. And I think that is quite likely, because plenty of these sides know the qualities of Harvey Elliott, and I think for him personally, he needs to find the right manager who wants to incorporate him into a system so he gets a defined role. I agree with Michael about not really knowing his best position. I can remember saying this on Blood Red not long after he was brought in with Fabio Carvalho. I didn't really understand exactly where either of them fitted into Liverpool's team, or what their roles were going to be. And that I still feel like that's the case. I'm not sure what he is. He's just a good player who's full of enthusiasm, has got a good left foot, but I don't know. I just felt there was a little bit of huff and puff, and as Michael said, just, sometimes the end product perhaps wasn't quite there. Of course, he's had limited opportunities compared to other players, but again, that's the manager's call. So if he doesn't fancy him, why waste your time? I know he's a Liverpool fan. It's hard for him. It'd be difficult for him to leave. But this is the game, isn't it? And especially now, he's not a kid anymore, is he? He's an established Premier League footballer, and I think it's time for him to really, nail down a starting 11 position in a side and kick on from there. And Liverpool could stand to make good money from that. So both parties should be happy in the end of it. But it's probably time for him to move on.
Yeah, I think the big difference really between him and Dominic Szoboszlai is physically, isn't it? He's not as quick, he's not as able to press, and that isn't, unfortunately, something that you can massively change. That is the reality, and that's how it's going to be for the next few years for Harvey. So I think go into maybe to a different league, maybe to go and try and play in a league where it is a bit more technical and that kind of way. I think possibly might get even more out of him. Certainly would give him the opportunity to do that. As you say, he's not had loads of chances to do that.
Do you think he'd be better suited to playing in Germany or even Italy?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, Germany is end to end in some respects, but it's probably not quite as physical as England, maybe in Spain. But I do there is a bit in the back of my head that I wonder how many of those teams would be willing to pay, a huge transfer fee. I imagine Liverpool would want probably 40 as a minimum, probably more than that, if I'm being totally honest, for a player of that quality with that experience, homegrown as well. Obviously, from their perspective, they'd want to get a big fee. But yeah, I do think there will be clubs who are interested. I thought Brighton was possibly one that might come in for him at one point. I think they were linked with him. It does feel like that would make more sense for him, definitely. Michael, is there anywhere that you can see him going that we've not mentioned there? Where do you think he might be best?
I mean, I think you make a good point on the physicality. He's a very technical player, isn't he? And maybe if the pace is slowed down a little bit, that might suit him. I think that even 10 years ago, the thought of an English player going abroad seemed a bit unusual. It's becoming more and more common now, isn't it? So I think that would be a possibility for him. I think he could thrive there. I mean, I mentioned Newcastle because there was a team linked. Look, I think technically he's got the qualities to do it, but I'd say you do make a good point on the physical aspect of it. Maybe a mid-table side might be slightly more suited. I see sort of similarities between someone like him and Emile Smith-Rowe, who a few years ago moved from Arsenal to Fulham. Hasn't really quite kicked on, has he? Again, a very technical player, maybe lacks the physicality, but I do think this summer is potentially Liverpool's last chance to bank a big transfer fee on him, because if, for instance, he sticks around next season, isn't much of a starter, then it becomes difficult in 12 months' time to get a good price for him. So I as I said earlier, I just think it's in everyone's best interest now that he does move on this summer.
What he doesn't want to do is go to another team, another big team who are prepared to pay the money and sit on the bench there as well.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's got to be the right move for him and a team that are like, we want Harvey Elliott and we want to build something around his creative tools. And if that happens to be a little bit further down the hierarchy in terms of a Premier League side, then he should probably consider it.
Yeah, and he's young enough to go somewhere and then go somewhere after that as well. If he was to go a little bit lower down, you could then establish yourself a little bit more and possibly even come back to Liverpool potentially if he reached those levels in the future. I wouldn't completely rule that out. But let's quickly move on to Wataru Endo as well. Not a huge amount to say about him. I know he's said himself that he expects to be at Liverpool next season. He's kind of happy with the very limited role that he has, Michael. It's a role that we've seen him come on for a few minutes here and there now and again. Not many players are happy with that, but in his words, he kind of says, well, I'm at Liverpool, so I don't really want to be anywhere else. And I suppose if he's happy to do that, then it doesn't really make any sense to push to move him out. So the right decision for him to stay, do you think? Do you expect to see that? And do you expect his role to be any different next season?
I don't, but I do think that Slot warmed to Endo as the season went on. He obviously really didn't give him many chances in the first half of the campaign, and he was given a few more cameo appearances in the second half, let's say. I quite like Endo. I think he's really good. I think for the role he does, he's brilliant. He comes in, he helps shore things up, close out games. Liverpool didn't win a huge amount of matches last season by... Is that Endo on the phone?
Do you know what? I don't even answer. He's got slide to answer, but doesn't tell me how to turn it off. I never ever get a call ever. This one's come through. I think we're safe. It was it was Harvey Elliott's agent. So what was it?
Right, okay. I like him. I think he's a really good player. As I say, Liverpool didn't win a huge amount of games by 3-4 goals last season, so there was a lot of games that were 1-2-0 that needed closed out. So yeah, I think he's better to stick about. I think again, as I come back to that point, if they were to sign a holding midfielder, that maybe slightly changes the picture once again. Particularly if we're expecting Szoboszlai to drop deeper and occupy one of those two slightly deeper midfield rooms. It again just reduces the playing time for Endo. You bring in another midfielder, then that maybe changes the conversation. But assuming there isn't another midfielder brought in, yeah, I think he's got a role to play next season for Liverpool.
a very similar role, I would imagine, to last season. But as I say, if he's happy with that, then I'm certainly happy to see him continuing to do that. You do need players like that in your squad, and if he's happy, then that is certainly one that makes sense. Let's move on to the forward line, because that's where the bulk of these players, where I think you can have a bit more of a conversation around them, are. We'll start with probably the most obvious one in Darwin Nunez. Rich, just in terms of his situation, it kind of feels like the right time, doesn't it? He's been here 3 years. It's not quite clicked. He's almost certain, I think, to move on somewhere. And to be fair to him, I do think there'll be a little bit of interest in his signature.
Look, let's put our cards on the table here. For me, it was the right time 2 years ago. So I've never kind of shied away from the fact that I've never talked to him. Not that I don't like him personally. I like, in terms of his personality. And I've never really doubted his work rate when he's been on the pitch and his appetite and his sort of enthusiasm. But right from the get-go, he just never looked good enough for me. He wasn't helped by the fact that he was coming in after the likes of Sadio Mane. It's just chalk and cheese for me. And I know he's missed chances and should have scored more goals or whatnot, but, constantly offside. Just think his whole other play isn't very good. Just not a Liverpool centre forward for me. So 100% time to go. I can see him doing well obviously he has done well in other leagues. In Portugal, he did very well. No reason why he couldn't go to Spain and sort of replicate that if he have a team that sort of is built around him. But Liverpool aren't going to build a team around Darwin Nunez, and the manager doesn't fancy him anyway. So yeah, let's get the best price for him. It was not a good transfer in my eyes. It cost a lot of money. So we just need to try and recoup as much as possible for that and say, look, thanks for your efforts and see you later.
Yeah, it's clearly not worked, Michael. It's clearly the right time for him to leave for his own career, I think, as well, if Arne Slot isn't going to play him a huge amount. But I do still think Liverpool could get quite a big transfer fee for him. I do think there'll be clubs interested. There's definitely interest from Saudi Arabia. There's been links with clubs in Italy. Atletico Madrid have been linked with him as well. It's a weird one because I wouldn't quite go as strong as Rich and say he should have been sold 2 years ago, but it's clearly not been a good transfer for Liverpool. It's not been a success in terms of relative to the price that they paid for him. But I still think there'll be a market for him this summer. I think there will be plenty of clubs who take a look and think, maybe they can just get a little bit more out of him.
How old is he now? 25?
Yeah, 26.
I mean, the thing with him is he actually has so many qualities that you'd want in a forward. He's physical, he's strong, he can bring other players in, he presses, he's fast. Just the big one that he lacks is consistent finishing, isn't it? And if you could get that, and if a club buy him and could manage to sort that element of his game out, there would be a fantastic player there. I don't think he's ever going to click. I just feel like at this stage, if he hasn't become that natural goal scorer, I just don't know if he ever will. I'm actually a little bit unsure. There is going to be a huge price, certainly in Europe. There is obviously interest in Saudi, as you mentioned, and they are willing to pay big sums. We do know that. But I wonder if European clubs, I mean, you look at some of the names in the market now, and we've been writing about it for weeks and weeks, Delap, Ekitike, Osherman, all these sorts of players. Nunez would be way down that list if you're a club like Napoli looking for a new centre-forward, Atletico Madrid as an example. So, but I definitely do think it's the right time to move on. He's had 3 years. I'm more on your side of the fence, really, Matt, that I think he did need to be given a couple of years to see if it would work. And we're at the stage now where it simply hasn't worked. And he didn't start any of the games after Liverpool won the Premier League as well. Other players obviously brought in and given opportunities. He wasn't, which probably in itself says something, doesn't it? So, I think he will be off this summer. And I think it's, again, another one that's probably best for everyone, really.
I think he only had one start since February.
That's awful.
Says it all, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, when Luis Diaz has moved from the left wing into the number 9 position as well, there's clearly, as you say, he's clearly not fancied by the manager, which I think inevitably will lead to a move this summer. But Probably a bit more of a debate about one or two of the others. I've mentioned Luis Diaz, so let's speak about him, Rich. There's been interest from Saudi in him, again, interest from Barcelona as well, supposedly, definitely in the past, supposedly has resumed again this summer. Is he one of those that you'd put in the category of, if the offer is big enough, then maybe you'd take it, but you wouldn't push him out of the door?
Oh, no need to me to add anything. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you probably nailed it. You got it in a nutshell there, haven't you, really? I really like Luis Diaz. I think he's a fantastic player. I think he's had a really good season. Far better this season than he was sort of in the second half of last year, I think. And if he wants a future at Liverpool, I think he's got one. However, if someone does come in with a big deal, something that offsets what you might lose on Nunez, then I think the number crunchers might look at that and say, well, if you want this player, you have to get rid of this player because they're offering us this amount. They may look at it and, I think he's one of those players whose future could remain uncertain across the summer, I guess. Unless he signs a new contract, of course, which would end it. But, yeah, I'd certainly like to keep him, but I do also appreciate that if there are other clubs who are interested and are prepared to spend the money, then it is possible that Liverpool could let him go.
Yeah, it's interesting they tried to get Anthony Gordon last summer. It's clearly a position that they think there is potential scope maybe to improve, or at least to bring in somebody of a similar level who is that little bit younger. 2 years left on his contract, 28 years of age, Michael. It feels like probably if a big offer came in, you'd have to think about it, wouldn't you?
I think if a big offer came, yeah, definitely. But I mean, in a sense, we could almost say that about every single player, couldn't we? And if it comes down to a straight keep or sell, it's absolutely keep in my eyes. I think he's played a really important role in the team this season. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he played 36 out of 38 Premier League matches. One of those he missed was after the team had won the title anyway. So he's been such an integral part to the team. He's versatile, can play wide, can play through the middle. I'm not massively keen on him through the middle personally. But I really like Diaz. And I think realistically, Gakpo's first choice out left. So assuming Liverpool sign a number 9 this summer, which I think we all think they're going to do, to have Luis Diaz as an option off the bench next season outside of your starting 11 would be an incredible choice, really. But I did think it was interesting. I don't know if you saw this, the social media post both him and his girlfriend did in the last couple of days. That very much read as a goodbye post. Without, it wasn't said implicitly, but it did read that way. And yeah, I mean, I've heard a little whisper he will either sign a new contract this summer or move on. So, and as you say, 2 years in his contract is probably not a real surprise anyway, but I think Liverpool should keep him, definitely. Yeah,
he's definitely a talented player. It's just making the most of the opportunities in the market, I think, is probably the way to put it, really. And there's maybe a bit of a question over him. Would you put Diogo Jota in the same sort of position, Michael, of Luis Diaz? He's maybe not had the best of seasons, but of course we know that there is a level of quality there when he's at his best. It's just a case of, are we going to see that again, or has that time maybe passed?
If you'd have asked me 3 months ago, he was a player I would have said definitely keep. I'm just starting to now more side towards move him on, really. He's a very good player. I was thinking this recently. I mean, you always think he was a winger, really, but he has certainly become a number 9, a centre forward, hasn't he? Look, as an option off the bench or as a backup striker, I think he'd be a really good player. I certainly don't think there's that absolute need to sell him that there perhaps is with Nunez. He's a player, he seems like a good character as well, Jota, and it's always been relied on for a goal, but that has just waned a little bit. And I think between him and Nunez, since mid-January, they've scored 2 goals combined. So that's a real problem. Now, okay, they haven't started lots, but between the two of them, that is a problem that needs to be addressed this summer. I think, again, it depends what else happens in the market. I would just side towards moving on really now, because I think his best days are behind him. And yeah, I think in the last couple of months of the season, he really, really struggled, to be honest.
I think the only sort of question would be that there's probably a bigger market for Luis Diaz than there is for Diogo Jota. And again, I have used the phrase market opportunity about 15 times already. But that kind of phrase I think comes to mind in terms of him as well. Let's just finish with Federico Chiesa, Richard. Obviously, not a huge sample size to determine whether he is any good or whether he is the right kind of player for Liverpool. But he's another one, I think, for me that I wouldn't be against Liverpool keeping, not least because his song is excellent. But is he somebody that has got a big decision to make this summer, do you think?
Yeah. Just before you do that, I just want to add in, I know you haven't asked me this, but just on Jota, you're bringing in Frimpong, you could be bringing in Kirkers, you could be bringing in Florian Wirtz, potentially. There's a lot of creativity there, which could play very much into Diogo Jota's hands. He's still a fox in the box, and I would fancy him to net with those type of players around him, so I would keep him. Back onto the question you actually asked me. Chiesa, it's a nice fella, isn't he? It's a nice fella. This market value, I don't like this word. Two words, this phrase rather. It's he hasn't had a fair crack of the whip, right? And we know he's got ability. He's proven that. He's a proven winner. But they signed him, 10 million, 12 million? Yeah. Signed him at a snip. Someone comes in and offers you more. It's kind of a bit of a no-brainer, isn't it? You'd probably have to move him on, wouldn't you? But at the same time, I think he certainly deserves a bit longer to see what he can do, because Salah signed a new contract, but for me, the process of replacing Salah starts now. You know what I mean? Do we know for sure he's going to see out those 2 years? You might not even want him to. He could drop off. It's quite. I know it seems implausible, but he's not getting any younger. This is surely Salah's last contract for Liverpool. I've got a feeling he's not going to play every single game unless he can maintain the unbelievable levels that he did for the majority of last season. So I do feel like there is more opportunity for Chiesa. It's just a case of whether Slot really wants to give him that opportunity. Well, he brought him in, so it's down to him, isn't he? Has he seen enough to say, okay, I reckon I can trust you more in games next season, when we're competing on four fronts and give him more of a chance, or if someone comes in, wants to take him back to Italy or whatever with a decent price, he could go. So up in the air, but his song is quite fun, so I'll say keep him.
Yeah, I think the World Cup might play into it for a few of these players, and I know Chiesa is one that has spoken about that. Obviously, not in the Italy squad this time around. If he's going to make that World Cup next summer, he probably does have to go somewhere and guarantee himself some regular football. Even then, it might not work out for him in terms of the national team, but I do think that is something to think about, not just for him, but probably for a few of these players. Harvey Elliott definitely in that category as well. But I think that will just about do us for this week's Liverpool.com podcast. Thank you to Rich for making your debut on this show, for Michael as well for coming along, for you guys at home for listening and watching, and we'll be back next week with the next Liverpool.com podcast.